Just when I thought the shame was going to eat me alive, a dishwasher came out of the kitchen, stared at me, and said, "Are you Michael's daughter?" But before I continue, tell me in the comments what city you're listening from. I would love to know how far this story has traveled, because what you are about to hear still shakes my soul. Sarah, 33 years old, walked quickly down the dark sidewalk, clutching the simple purse she carried to work every day. She had left late from the diner where she worked packing bread and running the register. She never imagined that Thursday, which began like any other, would end up being the day that marked her life forever. As she walked, she tightened the gray cardigan she wore over a worn-out white blouse. Her feet ached after standing for 12 hours, but there was something strange that night, something that made her feel uneasy, as if the air knew something she didn't yet. Patrick, her husband, always said she exaggerated everything, that she was too sensitive, too emotional, too attentive to everyone. The typical comment he used to mock her when he wanted to humiliate her without raising his voice. But still, when she saw him waiting for her outside of work in a nice shirt and that cologne he saved for special occasions, something inside her lit up. It wasn't common for him to pick her up, nor was it common for him to dress up like that. Patrick watched her get into the car with a smile that seemed freshly polished, too perfect, too rehearsed. Still, Sarah wanted to believe that something good was about to happen. Patrick had been cold and distant for weeks, hiding behind the excuse that he was looking for opportunities to earn more money. She saw him little, and when she did, he seemed to be in a bad mood. That's why, when he invited her to dinner, she believed it was time to recover what had been broken between them. Sarah looked at him from the passenger seat, trying to decipher what was behind his unusual attitude. He drove with a confidence that didn't fit the person who had lately been avoiding even eye contact with her. Patrick said without taking his eyes off the road. "Tonight, we are going to celebrate." "Celebrate what?" she asked, with a fearful excitement. "Our future." Sarah felt her chest warm. Those words sounded beautiful, but something inside her trembled. It was the feeling that when life suddenly smiles at you, it might be preparing a slap in the face. And yet, she wanted to believe. When they arrived at the restaurant, Sarah didn't know where to look. The illuminated sign seemed to be from another world. The place had large windows overlooking an inner terrace filled with warm lights, soft music, and tables wrapped in impeccable white tablecloths. There were fresh flowers on each table, and the waiters moved as if they weren't touching the ground. "I can't go in here, Patrick. Look at how I'm dressed," Sarah murmured in a low voice, feeling her cheeks burn. "You relax," he said, leaning in to kiss her on the forehead. "None of that matters tonight." Hearing him say those words stirred emotions she thought were dormant. For a moment, she felt like crying, not from sadness, but from relief, from hope. She thought that maybe he was becoming the man she married again, the one who made her laugh, who held her tight on cold nights, who promised he would never make her feel alone. A hostess in a flawless black dress greeted them with a professional smile. Seeing Sarah's simple clothes, she looked her up and down with an almost imperceptible but painful gesture. Sarah felt that prick of shame she had felt so many times in her life, but she said nothing. Patrick placed his hand on her back and walked firmly toward the table they were assigned, as if he owned the place. They were led to a table by a window overlooking an indoor fountain. The sound of the falling water created a magical, almost unreal atmosphere. Sarah could hardly believe she was there. As she sat down, she tried to adjust her blouse to hide that it was worn. Patrick, on the other hand, was in his element. He ran his hand over the tablecloth, sniffed the wine the waiter offered, and confidently ordered one of the most expensive on the menu. Sarah felt a pang of unease. The wine cost more than her entire week's grocery shopping. "Are you sure?" she asked in a low voice. "Trust me, Sarah. Today is a good day." The waiter poured the wine with elegance. Sarah held the glass carefully, as if it were thin crystal that could break between her fingers. The fruity and sweet aroma rose to her nose, and for a moment she allowed herself to feel pleasure. Patrick looked at her with that seductive gaze she hadn't seen in a long time. It was as if these luxurious walls transformed him into a different person. "I'm about to close a big deal," he said as they toasted. "One that will change our lives." "What kind of deal?" "One that will allow us to leave scarcity behind, your endless hours at work, our worries. I promise you." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. She had carried the weight of the household for years. Even the apartment they lived in had been an inheritance from her father. She took care of everything: food, bills, cleaning. Patrick always said he would contribute more soon, that he was working on it, but that day he was saying something different. He was promising luxury, rest, a prosperous future. Sarah decided to enjoy the moment. She felt that although she didn't fully understand what was happening, her husband seemed to be looking at her as he used to. The conversation flowed with laughter and memories she hadn't heard from him in a long time. Patrick told anecdotes from when they were dating. He talked about trips they could take, about how tired he was of being a failure. Sarah wanted to believe his every word. The food began to arrive, one dish after another, each more perfect than the last. Sarah tried a risotto that tasted like heaven, a tender meat that melted in her mouth, a dessert so delicate it seemed forbidden. She felt like she was in a movie, but amidst all the beauty, there was something she couldn't understand. Patrick didn't touch his phone. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't distracted. It was as if he was at peace, a peace so absolute it didn't seem real. Sarah mentioned it to him with a shy smile. "You're acting strange." "Strange as in good strange. I've always been like this," he replied. "The thing is, you haven't really seen me lately." "And now you do?" she asked in a soft voice. Today, everything changed. Sarah looked at him for a long time, feeling a mix of love, nostalgia, and a small fear she couldn't explain. He took her hand for the first time in months. "I'm going to give you the life you deserve, Sarah. I promise." The night continued with conversations, expensive dishes, and brilliant promises. She didn't know that every word she heard carried a silent poison. When they finished dessert, the waiter approached with an impeccable smile and placed a black folder with the bill on the table. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. She had never been to a place where the bill was delivered in such an elegant folder. Patrick took the folder, opened it, and looked at it without expression. He closed the folder gently, as if it were nothing. "I'm going to the restroom." Sarah nodded, but before he walked away, he leaned towards her. His voice was a whisper, so soft it seemed affectionate, though it wasn't. "Thanks for dinner." Sarah blinked, thinking she had misunderstood. "Excuse me?" Patrick had already turned around. He walked between the tables with the same confidence as when he entered. Sarah expected him to stop in the hallway that led to the restroom, but he didn't. He continued straight towards the entrance. A waiter opened the door, and Patrick, without looking back, walked out of the restaurant. Sarah's heart began to beat so fast she felt dizzy. The black folder remained on the table like a sleeping monster. Sarah opened it with trembling hands. The sum was so high that she felt a punch in the gut. It was more than what she earned in 3 months. The manager approached with a cold calmness, as if he had experienced similar scenes before. "Will your companion be returning?" He went to the restroom," Sarah replied, her voice breaking. The manager raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am." He left through the front door. I don't know what happened. He wouldn't just leave like that." "Can you pay?" "I don't have that amount." I can't pay that. Then I will have to call the police." The word police fell on her like a sentence. Some diners began to turn, whispering, watching as shame covered her like a heavy cloak. "Please," she begged, let me call someone." "Who?" Sarah opened her purse in desperation. She had her old, cracked phone and a nearly empty wallet. "I have no one to call," she finally said in a painful whisper. "Then we will have to proceed." A wrinkled, trembling, but firm hand touched the manager's shoulder. "I'll pay." The silence grew thicker. Sarah lifted her face. In front of her was an old woman with gray hair tied back under a kitchen cap, a stained apron, and worn-out shoes. Her gaze was deep, dark, as if it held years of untold stories. "Eleanor," the manager scolded, "you can't intervene in these cases." "You be quiet," she replied without raising her voice, but with an authority that left him motionless. The old woman took a small wad of bills from her pocket and placed it on the table. The manager, surprised, checked the amount and nodded. Perfect. Sarah felt her breath returning slowly. She wanted to thank her, to hug her, but before she could say a word, the old woman held her gaze with an intensity that paralyzed her. "Are you the daughter of Michael Caldwell?" Sarah swallowed. "Yes." "How do you know?" The old woman sighed as if that answer confirmed something she had been waiting years for. "I worked for him for 20 years, and before he died, he told me, 'When you see my daughter, give her this.'" From her pocket, she pulled out an old, yellowed envelope with the name Sarah written by hand. And when Sarah held it in her fingers, she felt the world stop. Because that envelope didn't just bring a message, it brought the truth that would shatter her entire life. The paper crackled softly as Sarah slid her fingers under the yellowed flap. Despite the tremor in her hands, she opened the envelope with an almost reverent delicacy. For a moment, she thought she would find money, some old love letter, or perhaps a photograph. But what fell into her hands was an old metal key, rusted at the edges, and a sheet of paper folded in 4, written in the calligraphy she had known since childhood, the firm, round handwriting of her father, Michael. Sarah said nothing, only felt her heart clench in her chest as she read the first lines. The page trembled as she moved through the words. "The man you married is looking for this. Do not give it to him. It is a trap." An icy wave ran through her body from her neck to her feet. She clung to the paper as if it were the only solid thing in the midst of an invisible shipwreck. It didn't need to say the name. She knew it was talking about Patrick. Eleanor watched in silence. Her arms were crossed, her gaze fixed on Sarah, as if she already knew what she was reading. When Sarah looked up, Eleanor nodded slowly. "Your father knew this would happen," the old woman said. "That's why he gave me that envelope. He asked me to keep it, to wait for the right moment." "The right moment for what?" Sarah asked, her voice cracking. "What did my father know?" Eleanor sighed as if she had been holding on to that answer for years. Then she turned on her heel and headed for the back door of the restaurant. "Come, we can't talk here." Sarah followed her, still holding the letter and the key as if they were part of her own body. They crossed a narrow hallway, went down some damp stairs, and emerged into a dark alley that smelled of old grease and humidity. Eleanor walked decisively towards a small van parked next to some dumpsters. "Get in." "Where are we going?" "To find out why your father feared your husband so much." The journey was long. They crossed empty avenues, industrial zones, streets that Sarah didn't recognize. Outside, the city was slowly shutting down, but inside the van, the tension grew like a caged animal. Sarah looked out the window without seeing anything. She could only think about her father's sentence. Why would he have said that? How could he have foreseen that Patrick would try to use her? And worse, for what? After almost an hour, Eleanor turned down a dead-end street and stopped the van in front of a rusty iron gate. There was graffiti on the walls, and the smell of abandonment hung in the air. "Where are we?" "In a place only your father and I knew about," Eleanor replied as she got out of the vehicle. "Come on." She used the same key from the envelope to open the padlock on the gate. Inside, a dark, dusty hallway led them to an even older door, reinforced with bars. Eleanor turned on a flashlight and pointed it at the number on the plate. 37. "Your father rented this storage unit for years. He never told me what he kept here, only that if something happened to him, you would come one day. He gave me that key and a warning." She opened the door with effort. The sound of the metal turning in the lock was harsh, creaky, as if waking something that had been asleep for too long. When she switched on the hanging light from the ceiling, Sarah saw a cold, barely furnished space. In the center was a thick wooden trunk secured with another old padlock. Sarah felt her legs weaken. She approached it slowly. It was a large trunk with iron edges and thick hinges. The lock matched the shape of the key. "Are you ready?" Eleanor asked. "I don't know," Sarah whispered. "But I need to know the truth." She inserted the key. The lock gave way with a dry sound. She opened the lid, and a smell of aged wood hit her face. Inside, well organized, were papers, folders, a tin box, and on top, an envelope stamped with red ink. "Confidential." Sarah took it and opened it with unsteady hands. Inside were several typewritten pages, yellowed, with the letterhead of the family company her father had founded decades ago. The title, written in large letters, left her paralyzed. "Confession of Michael Caldwell." "Confession," she murmured. "Of what?" Eleanor came closer. Sarah began to read aloud. As the words filled the silence of the place, the past began to crumble before her. "I, Michael Caldwell, declare under oath that during the 1,990 seconds, I committed acts that severely affected the integrity of my business partner, Salvatore Russo." Sarah swallowed hard. Salvatore Russo was the father of Valerie, her half-sister. Her mother had told her that both men had been friends, founders of a successful company, until a fight separated them forever. The document continued with details of financial movements, stock manipulation, fake loans, hidden accounts. In short, her father confessed to having ruined Salvatore and taking over the majority of the company. Sarah stopped reading. She felt nauseous. This went against everything she believed about her father. Michael had been an upright, just, respected man. Or had he? What if it had all been a facade? "Is this real?" Sarah asked in a low voice. "Your father wrote it with his own hands. He typed it himself. He signed it. He sealed it." "It's all here," Eleanor said. "And that's why he hid it, because he knew that if this came to light, it would destroy his entire legacy." Sarah stumbled backward. She leaned against the wall, feeling short of breath. Her father, the man who always told her to act with dignity, not to stoop low, that education was the only thing no one could take from her, had committed such a huge fraud. And if that was true, what else had he hidden? "Patrick is looking for this," Sarah repeated to herself. "That's why he treated me so well tonight. That's why his attitude changed. He just wanted this confession." "And he didn't act alone," Eleanor said, moving closer. "The worst part isn't that Patrick used you, it's that he did it on someone's orders." "Who?" "Valerie." Sarah froze. "Your half-sister always suspected her father had been betrayed. Your father tried to protect her, give her some of the inheritance, keep the peace, but she never forgave, never forgot. For years, she searched for proof, traces, something to incriminate him. Until she met Patrick, she paid him to get close to me. More than paid him, she trained him to seduce you. He knew from day one that you were the key, that you were the obedient daughter, the one with access to everything, the naive one." Sarah clenched her fists. The pain was so deep she could barely breathe. Every gesture, every caress, every promise from Patrick transformed into a weapon. And the worst part? She had loved him. She had trusted him. She had defended his character against everyone. "But there's more," Eleanor said cautiously. Sarah looked at her without a word. She was exhausted, emotionally devastated, but she needed to know everything. "Your father not only betrayed his partner, he also had a son out of wedlock. That son is alive." "What?" "His name is Leo, and he is my son." The silence that followed was so dense that Sarah thought the air had frozen. She looked at Eleanor as if seeing her for the first time. You and my father. Yes, for years. It wasn't casual. We loved each other in our own way, but he had his public life, his company, his image. I was just the housekeeper, so he asked me to raise Leo away from everything." In silence, Sarah couldn't process the information. She had a brother she didn't know, who lived somewhere in the world without knowing who he really was. A brother who could change everything. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because there's no more time for lies. Because your husband is close. Because if he finds this document and discovers there's another heir, he won't stop." A noise in the distance interrupted the conversation. A car turned on its lights at the entrance of the alley. Sarah ran to the storage unit door and peeked through a crack. It was Patrick. He was in his black sedan, stopped, with the headlights on. He didn't move, just watched. "He found us," Sarah murmured. Eleanor turned off the hanging light from the ceiling and took her arm. "Calm down, he can't do anything to you if you don't let him." Sarah watched Patrick's face from the shadows. He didn't get out of the car, just lit a cigarette, smoked it calmly, and then drove away. The tension didn't dissolve. Sarah knew that wasn't a retreat, it was a warning. "Where is Leo now?" she asked with a firm voice. Eleanor looked at her gravely. "Here, in this city. He lives with me." "Then take me to him." Eleanor hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "It's time for you to meet him and decide what to do with the truth." Sarah put the confession, the key, and the letter in her purse. She still didn't know if her father had been a villain or a man trapped by his mistakes. She still didn't know if Leo would agree to meet her. She still didn't know how to face Valerie or Patrick, but one thing was certain. She was no longer the same woman who had walked into that restaurant, and what was to come would be even more painful and revealing. The dawn found Sarah staring out the window of Eleanor's van. The lights of the storage facility were behind them, but the weight of what she had discovered hadn't left her chest. The engine hummed monotonously, breaking the silence that had settled between them. In her hands, she clutched the purse where she kept her father's confession. It was the only tangible trace of her previous life, or of her broken life. Because from the moment she knew her husband was an infiltrator, and that her father had a hidden son, the word family had lost all meaning. "I need to stop by my house," Sarah said in a low voice, as if speaking to the void. "I need to change my clothes, take a shower, think." "Of course," Eleanor replied, turning the wheel toward the city center. "I have to go check on Leo. I'll drop you at your building, and we'll meet up later." "Yes, that's fine." The drive was short. Sarah recognized every street, every shop, every bench in that area, as if they were old acquaintances. She had lived there since her father left her the apartment. Although she had renovated it with effort, it was still modest but warm. She always thought that place would protect her. What an irony. As she got out of the van, the first thing she noticed was the silence. Not the usual morning silence, but a heavy, tense one. The building seemed dark. The main entrance was locked as always, but something caught her attention. A white envelope was hanging from the doorknob of the gate. Her name was written on it in black ink. She took it warily. Opening it, she found an eviction notice. The document, sealed by a notary, indicated that the property no longer belonged to her and that she had to vacate the premises. Sarah felt a wave of dizziness, pushed the door urgently, and ran up the stairs at full speed. When she reached the third floor, in front of her door, she stopped dead. The lock had been changed. She tried her key, the usual one, but it wouldn't go in. She tried again, nothing. Tears began to well up in her eyes before she could react. She pounded on the door with force. She called out, "Is anyone there? It's me, Sarah. This is my house." A neighbor's door creaked open. An elderly woman in a pink robe and disheveled hair peeked out. It was Mrs. Carroll, her neighbor for years, the same one who would ask for sugar or lend her a fan in the summer. "Oh, Sarah, they didn't let you in." "I'm so sorry," Carol said softly. "Who? What's going on?" "Some people came yesterday. They changed the lock, took out some things. They said it was on Valerie Rousseau's orders and that you didn't live here anymore." Sarah's heart pounded like a runaway drum. She went downstairs again, her legs trembling. When she reached the street, a black SUV pulled up in front of the building. Valerie got out, looking perfect in an expensive coat, sunglasses, and a satisfied expression on her face. Beside her, a lawyer with a briefcase walked with a firm stride. Sarah looked at her as if she were seeing a ghost. Valerie slowly took off her sunglasses. "I'm glad you're here," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I thought you'd be later." "What are you doing?" "What I should have done a long time ago." The lawyer stepped forward and handed her an envelope. "Please read this, Mrs. Caldwell." Sarah opened the document. As she read, the words turned into knives. "This is a transfer of property." "Yes," the lawyer confirmed. "Signed and legally sealed. A few months ago, you signed a power of attorney in the name of your husband, Patrick Borda. He used that power to cede the property to Valerie Russo as compensation for a business debt." "I didn't sign anything like that," Sarah shouted. "I never signed over my apartment. You signed a broad power of attorney, ma'am. You granted him authorization to act on your behalf. It's all legal." Sarah looked into Valerie's eyes, searching for a crack, a minimal gesture of humanity. She only found triumph. "Isn't it enough that you took my husband from me, that you used me as a pawn? You don't have a husband anymore, darling. Just a legal problem that is now mine. This place should have always been mine. My father was also an owner of this company, of this history, but I was left with the scraps until I decided to take what is rightfully mine." Sarah gritted her teeth. "You don't want justice, you want revenge. Call it what you want. To me, it's balance." Valerie turned around and went into the building as if it were already hers. Sarah was left alone, standing on the sidewalk with the envelope still in her hand. She was surrounded by neighbors watching her from their windows. A mix of pity, curiosity, and morbid fascination filled the air. And then she felt naked, exposed, humiliated. Her steps led her to the one place where she still thought she had some control, her job. The diner where she had worked for 5 years. There she was respected, valued, or so she thought. When she entered through the service door, she noticed the evasive glances. No one greeted her, no one smiled, not even Katya, her shift partner, who always welcomed her with a hug. Sarah felt a pang in her chest, walked to the locker room, put on her apron, and went to the kitchen. But before she could pick up the knives, her boss's voice boomed from the back. "Sarah, to my office now." Stephen, a stout and nervous man, slammed the door shut once she was inside. "Can you explain this?" he asked, tossing his phone onto the desk. The screen showed a social media post. A local news blog had published, "Family Scandal. Daughter of deceased entrepreneur Michael Caldwell, embroiled in conflicts over hidden inheritances and financial manipulation. Her stepsister, Valerie, takes control." Sarah's face appeared in a blurry photograph. "This is a lie," she said. "They're manipulating everything. Maybe, but I don't care. The board called me. They said for now, it's best if you step away. The center's reputation can't be affected." "I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm truly sorry." She stood still, as if her bones were made of lead. She slowly took off her apron, folded it, and left it on the table. "Thank you for the time you allowed me to be here." When she left, she was no longer crying. She walked to the street and sat on a bench. Her purse was on her lap, her fingers clutching it. It was all she had left. A confession, an old key, and a betrayal that burned like fire under her skin. People passed by without looking at her. No one imagined that this woman in simple clothes and a lost gaze had, in 24 hours, lost her home, her job, her husband, her history. And as the midday sun beat down on her face, she thought of something she hadn't wanted to admit. Valerie hadn't just stripped her of her possessions. She had taken her voice, she had silenced her, and Sarah couldn't allow that. She took out her phone, dialed Eleanor's number, her voice trembling. "Eleanor, I'm here, child. Can I come to you?" "Of course, I'm home. Leo is here too. Come." Sarah hung up. She rose from the bench, as if her feet weighed tons, but her steps were firm. She was no longer afraid. She couldn't be. Because when they take everything from you, the only thing left is courage. And she had more of it than she imagined. The city seemed different as she walked along the sidewalks, as if the world had shed its skin in the last few hours. Her purse was her only belonging, but it also contained everything. Her father's confession, the symbol of her downfall, and perhaps the key to rebuilding what was left of her life. She arrived at Eleanor's building after a long, silent walk. It was a modest complex, with time-stained walls where the cement was peeling, and the windows were small and curtainless. There was no marble or elevators, but there was a sense of dignity. She rang the bell with trembling fingers. Eleanor opened the door, wearing a flower-stained apron and a warm smile that seemed to defy the storm they were both enduring. "Come in, child. I was waiting for you. Leo is here too." Sarah swallowed. She never thought that meeting a brother she didn't know existed would create such a profound vertigo. She crossed the threshold, and the smell of freshly baked bread and coffee caressed her senses. The kitchen was small but cozy. In a corner, with his back to her, a young man was checking some wires on what looked like a broken lamp. "Leo," Eleanor said softly, "I'd like you to meet Sarah." The man turned slowly. Sarah felt something break inside her. It was like seeing a photograph of her father from the 1970s. The same firm chin, the same broad forehead, the dark, deep eyes. Only instead of a tie, he wore a paint-splattered black t-shirt and ripped jeans. He looked at her, not understanding. He smiled politely, wiping his hands on a rag. "Hi, Sarah, right? My mom told me you needed a place to stay for a couple of days." "No problem. You can stay here." Sarah opened her mouth to reply, but Eleanor spoke first. "No, Leo, she's not just here for that. Sarah is your sister." The silence fell like a tombstone. Leo blinked, then laughed. A nervous, uncomfortable laugh. "My what?" Eleanor approached slowly, took off her apron, and placed it on the table. Her eyes were moist. "I didn't tell you before because I wanted to protect you. I wanted to spare you the pain of a dirty story. But there's no time for that anymore. Your father wasn't who you thought he was. It was Michael Caldwell." Leo took a step back. His face paled. "No, my father died when I was a child. He was a driver. His name was Luis Gonzalez. Luis raised you, took care of you, gave you his last name, but he wasn't your biological father." Sarah sat down. She felt the scene slipping from her grasp. Leo looked like he was about to explode. He paced back and forth like a caged animal. "And you're telling me now? After all these years, after I built a life on a lie? Your father, Michael, left a confession." "It's here," Sarah said, carefully taking the envelope from her purse. "The truth is in these pages, and also what he wanted for you, what they hid from you." Leo looked at her with suspicion. "And why are you telling me? Why do you just show up out of nowhere? What do you want from me?" "Nothing. I just wanted to meet you and tell you what I just discovered too. They used me, they destroyed me. All for a secret you didn't even know existed." Eleanor approached her son and cupped his face in her hands. "You're not alone. You never were, and even less so now." Leo dropped the rag he was still holding. He slumped into a chair, his gaze lost. "All this time, I've been living a lie." "We all have," Sarah said in a low voice, "but you can still decide what to do with the truth." The minutes dissolved into the air. No one spoke. Sarah left the envelope on the table. Leo watched it as if it were burning. Finally, he opened it. He didn't read aloud. His eyes moved quickly, desperately. When he finished, his hands were shaking. "So the will was fake." "Yes, my father wrote it to protect you. He knew that if he included you openly, Valerie would destroy you. That's why he hid the document. That's why he put us on this path." Leo looked at her, still in disbelief. Something in his gaze had changed. It was no longer hostility. It was disorientation and pain. "I don't know if I can forgive this," he said finally. "You don't have to forgive anything yet. You just need to process it. I'm learning to do it too." She stood up and went to the kitchen. She poured 3 cups of coffee. The ordinary mixed with the extraordinary. Sarah watched his gestures. They were familiar. Even when he poured the sugar, he had the same meticulous movement as her father. They were sitting in a silence that seemed to be starting to heal, when there was a knock on the door. Eleanor frowned. "Are you expecting someone?" "No." Sarah got up, walked to the door, and looked through the peephole. Her blood ran cold. "It's Patrick." "Don't open it," Leo said, getting to his feet. The door rumbled with another knock. "Sarah, I know you're in there. Open up. I need to talk to you." She backed away, paralyzed. "We have nothing to talk about," she shouted. "That document doesn't belong to you. You know you're making a mistake." Leo approached, grabbing a metal pipe from the corner where he kept his tools. His face was hardened. "You're not coming in here, Patrick." He knocked again, this time with more force. "That document is dangerous. You don't understand what you're doing." Leo yanked the door open and stood in the frame. "You have no right to cross this threshold. If you do, I'll throw you out. And believe me, I want to." Patrick looked at him, surprised. He didn't recognize him. He pressed his lips together, tense. "And who are you?" "I'm Leo, Michael Caldwell's real son, and the one who's going to unmask you." Patrick took a step back. Then two. The smirk of superiority vanished. Sarah appeared behind her brother. "Go away. You have no power over me anymore." Patrick looked at her with a flicker of pity. "You're making a mistake, Sarah. You're betting on a broken story. That man, your father, wasn't what you think he was. And you are, right? An exemplary husband, a professional traitor." Patrick looked down, turned, and walked away without another word. Leo slammed the door shut. The echo resonated through the walls. Sarah exhaled the air she didn't know she was holding. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me. I'm just starting to understand who I am, but I swear one thing. I won't let them keep humiliating you or destroy what little we have left." Sarah looked at him with tears in her eyes. "We're siblings, Leo. We didn't ask for this, but we are. And you're the only real thing I have left," he replied. And in that clumsy embrace, full of pain and hope, something new began. It wasn't a conventional family, not even a stable one, but it was the beginning of a reconstruction. Sarah was no longer alone. Leo wasn't either. And though the past was still burning, the present offered something different, a possibility, a bond, a reflection. That dawn was different for everyone in that house. The air felt dense, like before a storm, but there was no fear. There was determination. Sarah woke up on a mattress on the floor, covered with a blanket Eleanor had lent her. The aroma of fresh coffee drew her to the kitchen, where mother and son were talking in low voices. When they saw her, they both stopped. "Today is the day," Sarah said as she sat at the table. "We can't wait any longer. If Valerie already has the confession scanned or leaked, she could use it to take everything." Leo nodded seriously. "And the worst part is that her plan was always to turn that lie into truth," he said. "She doesn't even want justice, just revenge." Eleanor set her coffee cup down on the table with force. "That's why we're going to change the rules. We won't fight on her turf, we'll do it on ours." Minutes later, they were on their way to the headquarters of the Caldwell Corporation, the company that started it all. Sarah felt a lump in her throat. She hadn't set foot in those offices for years. When her father died, they pushed her away with excuses. They promised her a pension, a fund that never arrived. Valerie slowly took over every space. It was time to get her out of there, or at least to strip her of the power she wielded like a whip. The boardroom was packed. Shareholders, lawyers, key employees. An urgent meeting called by Valerie, where she would present a new phase for the business group. Sarah knew it. That phase consisted of snatching everything from her in the name of historical reparation. From the hallway, they heard her voice. "As many of you know, our family was the victim of a deception. My father, Ernesto Russo, was a founding partner of this company, but he was betrayed by his own partner, Michael, who hid assets, diverted funds, and signed a fraudulent will." Leo clenched his fists. "She's selling it as a fight for the truth," he muttered. When Eleanor opened the boardroom door, the murmuring stopped. Everyone present turned their heads. Sarah entered with a firm step, Leo by her side. Behind them, Eleanor. The tension became almost unbearable. "What are you doing here?" Valerie asked, briefly losing control of her voice. You taught me something, Sarah replied, that power only exists if we all believe in it. And today, I've come to destroy that myth. You have no right to interrupt this meeting. I have more right than you. Because I didn't come with lawyers or lies. I came with the only thing I have left, the truth. Sarah walked to the center of the table. She held the envelope with the confession in her hand. She placed it on the polished wood. Those present leaned in to get a better look. Valerie approached with suspicion. Are you going to read it aloud? To confess what your father did? Sarah looked at her with a hint of sadness. You don't know what my father did or what he left written, but I know what you did. You used my husband, manipulated my life, invented a war. Valerie didn't respond. Her face was a mask of coldness. Sarah took a lighter from her purse. She lit it. The flame crackled. Everyone in the room grew restless. She looked at the shareholders one by one. This document was written by a man who was dying of guilt. Maybe it told the truth, maybe it didn't. But I'm not going to let this paper define our lives. Not mine, not my brother's, not yours. Sarah lit a corner of the paper. The flames spread quickly. Shouts soon followed. She's crazy, one yelled. That's evidence. She's destroying a confession. That's illegal, shouted another. Sarah didn't flinch. She let the flames consume the paper on a metal plate. The smoke rose slowly, as if the past were dissolving in front of everyone. Valerie stepped forward. That doesn't save you. I have copies. I have backups, Eleanor spoke for the first time. Yes, but you don't have this. From her bag, she took out a second envelope. She held it up. Valerie's eyes widened. That's the will, someone murmured. The real one. The last one. The one Michael signed weeks before he died. And you hid it, Valerie accused. You have no right to show it here. Eleanor opened the envelope, took out the document, and showed it. This will names Leo Gonzalez as the primary heir of the Caldwell Corporation, as he is the biological son of Michael Caldwell. The silence was total. Valerie paled, took a step back. You can't prove that. Leo lifted his head. I am his son, and yes, I can prove it. The murmurs grew. Someone pulled out a phone and started recording. The shareholders looked at each other, lost. Then Sarah reached for the will, took it, held it up for everyone to see. This paper also has power. It can give us control, companies, accounts, properties, but I don't want that. I already know what a piece of paper is worth. Absolutely nothing if there's no truth behind it. She brought the lighter to one of the corners. Eleanor held her breath. Leo looked at her, surprised. Sarah, what are you doing? What no one dared to do before. And she lit it. The flames danced, devouring the will inch by inch. The boardroom became a silent battlefield. The document fell to the floor in ashes. You've gone insane, Valerie shrieked. You just destroyed our only legitimate proof. No, Valerie. I just freed everyone from this dirty war. There's no confession anymore. No will. Now, what we do with our lives is what will truly matter. Leo approached her, took her hand. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. The shareholders began to get up. Some were arguing, others were applauding. No one knew how to process what they had just witnessed. Valerie, not knowing what to do, left the room without a word. Power was slipping through her fingers like wet sand. Eleanor hugged Sarah. You have done something very few dare to do, to renounce control, to embrace freedom. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt she could breathe without fear. The past no longer had power over her, and the future would be hers, even if she had to build it from the ashes. They left the building amidst murmurs, cameras still recording, astonished faces, and many other expressions of doubt. Sarah didn't stop. Leo was by her side, head held high and body rigid. But as they turned the corner, away from the spotlights and microphones, his step faltered. As soon as they reached Eleanor's car, Leo opened the back door and collapsed onto the seat, his head in his hands. It wasn't physical exhaustion, it was something else. The kind of exhaustion that drags from within, as if the soul resents carrying so much misplaced weight. Sarah watched him in silence. She knew what was coming. The collapse after the heroic act, the fear hidden behind brave decisions. Eleanor started the car without a word and drove them straight home. There was no time for celebration. Something in the air predicted that the worst was yet to come. That same night, while Leo slept on the couch, his face turned to the wall, Sarah received an anonymous message. It was a terse note with no sender, written in a mechanical font. "Tell your brother to hide. Patrick has talked too much. They've already put a price on his head." Sarah felt her stomach drop. Eleanor read the message from the kitchen doorway, her hands damp from washing dishes. "It can't be true," she whispered. But it was, and it didn't take them long to confirm it. The next morning, a call from an old contact of Eleanor's, a retired lawyer who had once worked for Michael, informed them that in certain private investor circles, they were talking about Caldwell's bastard son as a legal nuisance that needed to disappear. There were no official names, everything was said in whispers, but the threats were real and came from two fronts. On one side, the creditors who had financed Patrick's shady projects before he vanished. On the other, Valerie, desperate to maintain an image of control she could no longer sustain with paperwork. Sarah felt the tension escalate like a snake coiling around her throat. She knew Valerie was capable of many things, but she never imagined she would go this far. "Don't go out alone," she told Leo. "Don't answer calls you don't recognize. If they follow you, go into the first public place you find. And live like this until when?" he muttered without looking at her. "This is what it means to have a last name, an inheritance. To go from having nothing to being a target. We're not going to let it end like this," Sarah said. "But we need to move, disappear for a few days, think." They took refuge in an old cabin on the outskirts of the city, a place that had belonged to an old friend of Eleanor's, where phones barely had signal and the internet was a luxury. There, for the first time in days, they could breathe. Although the air was cold, the distance gave them some calm. Leo isolated himself. He walked through the woods in silence, aimlessly, without talking much. He would only stop sometimes to look at the sky, as if searching for answers. Sarah watched him from the window. "He's broken," Eleanor said. "He's not ready for this." "No one is," Sarah replied. "But he's the only one who can stop Valerie now." That night, Sarah approached him. Leo was sitting on a fallen log, his elbows on his knees, his gaze lost. "Do you remember when you stood up to Patrick at my door?" she asked him. "Yes." "You were scared." "Yes. And what did you do?" "I took a breath and faced him." "Because you knew there was something more important than your fear?" Leo didn't answer. "Look, we're not asking you to save a company or a last name. Just don't let what your father built end up in the hands of someone who wants to destroy everything, someone who has already done enough damage." "And what if all this is too much for me?" he asked in a thin voice. "Then we'll be there with you," Sarah replied, "to help you hold it up." Silence. Only the rustling of leaves moved by the wind. The next day, Leo made his decision. "I'm going to attend the shareholders' meeting scheduled for Monday. Valerie has demanded that I retract my statement. Well, I'm not. I'm going to speak. I'm going to say who I am and what I'm going to do." Sarah hugged him. "I'm with you. Whatever happens." That afternoon, before returning to the city, Leo received an envelope with no return address. Sarah intercepted it at the reception of the small, improvised mailbox in the town. She opened it with restless hands. It was a photo. Leo leaving the main building days before, with a red circle around his head, and a single sentence written by hand: "The enemy isn't just her. She's closer than you think." When Leo saw the image, he took a deep breath. "I don't know who's behind this anymore. We're moving big things, powerful people. They play differently," Sarah said. "And what if Valerie isn't alone? What if someone else from the inside? Don't think about that now. Just stay alert. There are 3 of us, and united, we can resist. Monday morning arrived with a leaden sky. The building where the meeting would be held was fortified with private security. Leo entered accompanied by Sarah and Eleanor. The shareholders were waiting for him, and among them was Valerie. She sat with a twisted smile, dressed in white, as if wanting to project purity. When she saw him enter, her expression changed slightly, not with surprise, with tension. He sat down. Sarah squeezed his hand. The meeting began. A lawyer read the agenda. Then, Leo stood up. I'm not a businessman. I have no training in finance or experience in meetings, but I am Michael Caldwell's son, and I am here because I want to prevent this company from rotting from the inside out. Some applauded him, others murmured. Valerie raised her hand. And what do you propose, Leo? That we hand you the presidency because of your bloodline? Go back to the Middle Ages. I propose something different. Create a board of directors with equal participation between family branches and external executives. A way to clean up the legacy of corrupt power and make everything transparent. That sounds like populism. No, it sounds like healing. The meeting was long and tense. Valerie didn't give up. She argued, attacked, manipulated, but Leo held his ground and, for the first time, didn't run. When the session ended, a shareholder approached him. Your father saved me from bankruptcy in the 90 seconds. I'm glad to see his son has some of his strength. We'll support you. Leo smiled wearily. Thank you. As they were going down the stairs, Eleanor stopped. You noticed Valerie barely spoke at the end. Yes, Sarah said, and she made a call right before you started speaking? Yes, something is coming, and it won't be clean. Sarah felt it too, as if the real enemy hadn't shown their face yet, as if everything they had lived through was just the prelude. And so, when they thought the hardest part was over, a new shadow rose over them. It wasn't just Valerie anymore. It was something else, something invisible and even more dangerous. The atmosphere in the city had changed. It wasn't a visible change, it had no shape or name, but it felt as if everything was held in a great breath that no one dared to release. In the offices of Michael's old company, the hallways became quieter, the workers more attentive to every movement. Everyone knew something big was coming. No one knew exactly what. Sarah perceived it in the gestures, in the tense greetings, in the informal meetings where voices dropped when she passed by. Leo, for his part, walked with his shoulders straight, but dark circles were beginning to mark his face. He wasn't sleeping, or he wasn't resting. His mind never quieted down. That day, the day of the new meeting, dawned with a persistent rain. Sarah watched from the window as the drops drew crooked paths on the glass. She thought of her father. She thought of everything that had happened since that dinner at the restaurant. It was hard to believe only a few weeks had passed. It felt like a lifetime. Eleanor, in the kitchen, prepared coffee, as if performing a sacred ritual. She said nothing, but when she handed the cup to Sarah, her fingers trembled slightly. It was the day, the real end, or the real beginning, depending on how you looked at it. The meeting started on time. Cameras were forbidden. Only shareholders and board members were allowed in the room. Everything seemed controlled, cold, protocol-driven, until Leo stood up. He took a deep breath, pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase, walked to the head of the table, and placed a packet of sealed pages and a USB drive on the table. These are the last pieces of evidence we needed, he said. Bank accounts, financial movements, and receipts that prove for over 20 years, Michael consistently transferred money to an account in the name of Eleanor Vargas to support her, to support his son, to partially repair the damage of his silence. The shareholders shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Some nodded slowly, others exchanged glances. Valerie crossed her arms, said nothing. Leo looked at Sarah. She nodded. But that's not all, he continued. A trusted notary of Michael's arrived this morning. He had something to deliver to us, a message my father recorded shortly before he died. We haven't seen it yet. We will present it now before all of you. A profound silence fell over the room. The notary, a man with white hair and a dark suit, stood up. In a grave and measured voice, he explained that Michael had entrusted him with a final audiovisual will to be shown only if the children came together to that table. Leo inserted the drive. The screen at the end of the room lit up. Michael's tired face appeared. He was in a library, sitting in his favorite armchair. His eyes were the same as Leo's. His expression was firm but laden with something new. Humanity, if you are watching this, it means my children have found the truth and have come here together. I am ashamed I did not have the courage to tell them in life. To Sarah, my little light. To Leo, my hidden son. I did not have the strength to own up to my mistakes, and I made many. Valerie made a gesture of annoyance. Sarah barely blinked. Leo didn't move. I committed a sin that has no excuse. Hiding a child. Secretly loving a woman who was always loyal and silent. Eleanor, forgive me. And I committed another sin, remaining silent in the face of an injustice that harmed many families, including Valerie's mother's. Valerie lowered her head for the first time. I thought I was protecting my family, but in reality, I was protecting them from me. I became a silent tyrant. When I knew I had little time left, I tried to sort out the chaos, to leave clues, hints. But the most important thing is not the material legacy, it is the spiritual one. I want you to work together, not for a company, but for a purpose, to change what I couldn't, to heal from the truth, not from power. The image faded. The silence was absolute. Then, Valerie stood up. Everyone expected an apology, a reflection, something, but her eyes were filled with rage, the kind of fury born when defeat becomes irreversible. Hypocrite, she said, a hypocrite even after death. And you believe him? No one answered. This is a farce. Do you know how many years I spent by his side? How many sacrifices I made for this name? And now you want to erase everything with a sentimental video? She gathered her things, buttoned her coat, and walked toward the exit. I'm leaving. Go to hell, all of you, with your cardboard morality. No one stopped her. Valerie left and did not return. Days later, it was learned she had exiled herself in Europe. She sold her share of the company and disappeared from the map. Some said she was in therapy, others that she was planning a new revenge. But the truth is, she had simply given up. Sarah, Leo, and Eleanor stayed with the company, not as executives, not as presidents, but as guardians of a new way of doing things. They restructured departments, met with old employees, revived social projects, reformed unfair contracts. Leo started a scholarship program in his father's name. Sarah opened a community kitchen within the facilities, open to the entire community. One morning, as they were walking down the freshly painted hallways, Leo stopped in front of Michael's portrait. He was never perfect, he said. No, but he was human, Sarah replied, and he left something more important than power. What? A lesson. Months later, at a talk for young entrepreneurs, Sarah was invited to tell her story. At the end of her presentation, someone asked her what she had learned from it all. Sarah took a few seconds before answering. I learned that love is not enough if it is not accompanied by truth, that blood doesn't make a family, but loyalty does. That pain, even when it seems to destroy everything, is sometimes the only path to clarity, and that when you lose everything, you are left with the most important thing, the chance to choose again, to start differently. And she smiled. Not with the smile of someone who won, but with that of someone who survived, who resisted, who healed. Because life doesn't always reward the just or punish the traitor at the moment we expect, but it always gives a second chance to those who choose not to live with hatred. And that is the most powerful freedom there is. If you enjoyed this story, I invite you to leave a comment telling me what you felt while listening to it. And if you have gone through a similar situation of deceit, I would love for you to share your valuable opinion. There are many people going through a similar situation. We hope their voice lives in you. Share this story and be part of the change. Remember to tell me from which city you are watching this video. I would be very honored if you leave me a like, share the video with a friend or family member, and subscribe to the channel. Don't